It was a humid Friday afternoon in the Bronx. The air was thick with the smell of concrete, frying oil, and late spring heat. Sunlight spilled between buildings like it didn't belong there, glinting off windshields and cracked sidewalks. Kids shouted from the basketball court down the block. A fruit vendor was yelling in Spanish near the train station. Life in the neighborhood pulsed. Unfiltered. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stepped out of a rideshare car just before 2 p.m. There was no entourage, no press, no Capitol Hill suit. Just jeans, a white t-shirt, and a navy blue baseball cap pulled low, enough to hide her eyes. To anyone watching, she looked like any other Latina woman walking her block, which was exactly how she wanted it. She hadn't come back for politics. She had come back for something more honest. Inside Benny's Diner, a small, worn-in spot on the corner of White Plains Road, the air conditioning rattled faintly. Benny, the owner, was wiping down a table when she walked in. His face lit up instantly. "Look who it is," he said with a grin. "The congresswoman from the block." Alexandria smiled. It was the kind of smile people reserve for places where they're not a title, just a person. "Still just Alex here," she replied, and pulled him into a quick hug. The diner hadn't changed much. A jukebox still stood in the back, untouched. The walls were still yellowed from decades of grease and steam, and the coffee was still the strongest on the block. She sat by the window and sipped a cafecito, catching up with Benny while nodding at familiar faces passing by outside. With her was Jamal, a young, soft-spoken documentarian who'd reached out to her months ago. He wanted to film a project about systemic inequality through the lens of neighborhoods like hers. No producers, no big budget backing, just truth, he said, and she believed him. Around 2:30 p.m., they stepped back out onto the sidewalk. The idea was to walk a few blocks, gather ambient footage, maybe talk to a few locals if they were willing. Jamal kept his camera low-key, strapped tight to his shoulder. He was careful, respectful, invisible. They made it just one block before things shifted. A black and white NYPD cruiser rolled slowly up alongside them. Then it stopped. Two officers got out. One was younger, clean-shaven, visibly tense. The other older, bulkier, eyes scanning the street with the boredom of a long shift. They crossed the street toward her. "You live around here?" The younger one asked, eyes narrow. Alexandria turned. "Com." She recognized the tone, not a question, but a warning. "I'm walking through," she said, evenly. "Is there a problem?" "You were filming," the older officer said. "We need to see some ID." Jamal lowered the camera immediately, stepping in. "We're not filming anyone directly," he explained quickly. "It's a street-level community doc. First Amendment protected." Neither officer responded to him. The younger one stepped forward. "I said, we need identification." Alexandria's hand stayed by her side. She wasn't startled. Not yet. But something about the way they moved, the posture, the assumption reminded her why so many in this neighborhood never felt safe, even when doing nothing wrong. "My name is Alexandria," she said quietly. "We're filming for a local project, that's it." Still, they didn't budge. The older one shifted his weight, hand hovering near his utility belt, not reaching, just resting, like a reflex, and in that moment, she made a choice. She could have stopped it right there. One sentence would have been enough. "I'm Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez." A badge, a call. But she didn't say it. Not yet. Because this right here was the experience most people didn't get to escape from, and she wanted to feel it, document it, let the cameras catch it, not as a headline, but as truth. Across the street, a teenager lifted his phone and began filming. Another bystander pulled out their earbuds and stared. A few kids stopped their game. Jamal's camera kept rolling, low and discreet. The tension didn't explode, it simmered, quiet, familiar, and just like that, what began as a simple walk turned into something else entirely. The sidewalk felt narrower now. The cars passing by didn't seem to notice what was happening. But those who lived in the Bronx, they knew. They could feel it. That subtle shift in atmosphere when authority stops asking and starts assuming. Alexandria didn't move. She stood there, shoulders relaxed, her hands in plain sight. The younger officer, Grant, was now circling slightly, as if unsure of what he was seeing or who. Behind her, Jamal kept the camera steady. He wasn't saying much now. He'd seen enough encounters to know when words helped and when silence spoke louder. The older officer, Sergeant Mills, looked tired, but not hesitant. He spoke again, sharper this time. "You filming for a permit? Because if you're not, that's a citation." Alexandria tilted her head slightly, not in defiance, just enough to show she was listening carefully. "No citation required. We're not blocking foot traffic. Not recording anyone's private property. It's fully lawful." Mills wasn't interested in technicalities. His eyes kept drifting between her face and the camera. "Show me your ID," he said, for the second time, "or we'll have to take this downtown." She could have handed over her wallet, could have ended it right there, but something inside her paused, not out of pride or ego, but conviction, because what they saw wasn't a federal lawmaker. They saw a brown woman with a camera crew. That was it, and she wanted to hold them in that moment. Let them see her, not for her title, but for their assumptions. "My name is Alexandria," she said again. "That's all I'll say for now." A beat of silence followed. Not loud, but sharp. Grant looked frustrated. Mills shifted his stance. "You hiding something?" he asked, more as a jab than a question. She gave him a look that didn't blink. "No," she said, "but maybe you are." That landed heavier than expected. Mills' jaw tightened. Across the street, a few more people had stopped. A teenager in a blue hoodie raised his phone higher. "That's her," the kid said to no one in particular. "That's AOC. Bro, no way they don't see it." The crowd was still small, maybe 6, 7 people. But eyes were multiplying. Phones, too. And Alexandria knew something else was happening. The moment was no longer hers. It belonged to everyone watching. Grant clicked his shoulder mic and muttered a request for ID verification. Static answered him back. The dispatcher asked for clarification. He hesitated. Female subject, brown, mid-30s, filming near White Plains and 233rd. Refusing ID. He didn't say her name, because he didn't know it yet. Jamal leaned toward her, whispering softly, "You want me to say it?" But she shook her head. Not yet. It wasn't martyrdom, it was purpose. If they couldn't see her for who she was without the title, then they didn't deserve the shortcut. Another local, an older man with a limp and a Yankees cap, stepped closer. He looked directly at Mills. "You know who she is?" he asked, voice scratchy but firm. "She's your congresswoman. From this very district." The officers froze. Just for a second, Grant's face shifted. Mills didn't say anything. Not yet. Alexandria still hadn't raised her voice. Still hadn't made a scene. She simply reached into her back pocket, pulled out her wallet, and opened it slowly. The blue and gold ID card of the U.S. House of Representatives flashed in the sunlight. Mills stepped back. Grant went pale. She held it up, not like a shield but like a mirror. "You didn't ask what I do," she said. "You just decided what I must be." Phones kept recording. The murmurs grew louder. And the power dynamics, the ones so often invisible, flipped in an instant. Asterisk at first, it was just a few voices, uncertain, questioning. A man with a shopping bag paused. A mother slowed her stroller. A group of teenagers abandoned their basketball game halfway down the block and wandered closer, sensing that something unusual was happening. The police officers were trying to maintain control, but it was slipping, not with shouting or chaos, but with awareness. The kind that spread like smoke. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stood steady, ID in hand, but not raised triumphantly. She wasn't performing. She wasn't protesting. She was simply present, undeniably so. Grant, the younger officer, spoke into his radio again, this time more urgently. "Possible match on a public official. Can we confirm a federal ID for Alexandria Ocasio?" The static returned. The voice on the other end stumbled. "You say, Ocasio-Cortez." The name, spoken aloud for the first time, shifted everything. Mills didn't speak. His jaw was tight, his eyes darting from Alexandria to the growing crowd. He wasn't a rookie. He knew what was coming. The teenager in the blue hoodie stepped forward. Phone, camera still live. "She's a congresswoman. Bro, you serious?" Grant turned to Alexandria, his face clouded now with something between disbelief and discomfort. "You could have just said so." She looked at him calmly. "Shouldn't have to." And there it was, the truth, plain and powerful. Because in the seconds between their questions and her silence, everything they assumed had already done the damage. The moment they asked for ID, not from a place of procedure, but presumption, they had made their choice. From across the street, more phones were up. The livestream that began on a teenager's Instagram had surpassed 2,000 viewers, and it was climbing fast. Jamal, still filming with his DSLR, wasn't speaking anymore. He just followed her movements, tracking every glance, every beat of restraint in her face. He knew this wasn't footage, it was history. Then came the crowd's first voice, raised with clarity. A woman in scrubs, maybe just off a shift, called out from the edge of the sidewalk. "She represents us. You don't treat her like that." Another followed. "Would you've done that if she was white?" The officers didn't respond, but their silence screamed. Mills shifted his weight. He looked at Grant. Grant looked at the badge in Alexandria's hand, and then, for the first time, his posture softened. Not out of respect, but realization. Mills cleared his throat. "Ma'am, if this has been a misunderstanding, but Alexandria stopped him with a single word. "No, just that. Soft, firm, not vindictive but honest. There wasn't a misunderstanding. There was a decision." A collective murmur swept through the crowd like a gust of wind. Grant took a step back. He wasn't sure what to do now. The badge in his hand meant nothing anymore. Not when half the block was recording. Not when Twitter was already catching wind. Mills opened his mouth to speak again, but Jamal was already turning the camera. Not toward the officers, but toward the crowd. Toward the faces watching, reacting, understanding, because the story was no longer just about her, it was about all of them. Asterisk by the time the fourth police car slowed at the corner, the crowd had doubled. What began as a quiet street on an ordinary Bronx afternoon had turned into something else, something larger than any one person. Mothers with strollers stopped under awnings. Delivery drivers paused mid-route. Retired men sitting in folding chairs leaned forward with furrowed brows. It wasn't chaos. It was curiosity sharpened by experience, the kind born from years of watching power misused, and moments silenced. In the middle of it stood Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. Not speaking, not gesturing, just standing and being seen, fully, unapologetically. Camera never stopped. He had stopped worrying about angles or composition. Now, it was instinct, following truth as it happened. Across the crowd, the teenager in the hoodie was still live on Instagram. The caption read, "They didn't know who she was." His viewer count had jumped to 18,000, and climbing. People in the chat were commenting from Harlem, Queens, Miami, Chicago, even London. "That's AOC. This is how they treat her. Imagine the rest of us. This is real. No edits, no script." Grant, the younger officer, was backing up now. His eyes darted to the other patrol car, pulling in, looking for backup or maybe escape. Sergeant Mills stayed still, arms crossed, jaw set. Alexandria finally moved. She took a slow step forward, not toward the officers, but toward the crowd. And then, for the first time since it all began, she spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "I didn't come here to be treated differently," she said. "I came here to see what hasn't changed." The words weren't dramatic. They weren't shouted, but they cut through the street like a blade. People fell silent. Even the cops. One by one, voices began to answer. "Tell it, sis. We see you." "They don't respect us unless there's a badge or a title." Alexandria nodded. She didn't need to say more. The crowd was saying it for her now. One woman stepped forward, middle-aged, wearing a Bronx Community Health Center t-shirt. She raised her phone, not to film, but to speak into it. "They stopped our congresswoman because she looks like us, because she is us, and they thought they could intimidate her like they do to us. But they were wrong." The video went viral within minutes. Clips from the Instagram Live were already being reposted on TikTok, Twitter, Facebook. News desks in Manhattan were receiving pings from producers. "Get someone to the Bronx. Something's happening." But no one there needed a headline. They were already living the truth. Back near the cruiser, Mills finally broke the silence. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "we didn't recognize you." Alexandria looked at him for a long second. "That's not the problem," she replied. "The problem is, you didn't respect me either way." No one clapped, no one cheered, they just stood with her. Not as an audience. As a community. The sirens had gone silent. The street was quiet now, not from fear, but from gravity. Everyone was listening. Everyone was watching. By this point, nearly every bystander had a phone in hand, some live streaming, others simply recording, unsure why, but knowing that something important was unfolding. The air was heavy with the electricity of recognition and respect. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stood at the center of it all, not at a podium, not under stage lights, but on cracked Bronx pavement, surrounded by her neighbors. And in front of her, two police officers who no longer held the weight. They thought they did. The younger officer, Grant, looked toward her ID again, now clearly visible. His eyes flicked up, then away. The name on the card wasn't just familiar, it was unforgettable. It wasn't just a name. It was a movement, a district, a symbol. Mills, the older sergeant, kept his arms crossed, but his expression was no longer dismissive. It was unsettled, like a man realizing the script he was trained to follow had just been ripped in half. And then she spoke. "I am Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez," she said. "No anger, no drama, just clarity. I represent this district, these people, this block." A hush spread through the crowd like a wave. Even the traffic on the nearby intersection seemed to slow. She held the badge out not like a trophy, but like evidence, not of power, but of irony. "And what happened here today isn't rare," she continued. "It's routine. Except this time, someone was watching. And this time, the person you stopped had a title." A murmur swept through the group. "Say it louder, Alex. Let em know." But Alexandria didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The quiet carried further than any chant. Across the street, Jamal had stepped back to get a wider shot. His camera, still rolling, captured the entire block. The officers, the phones, the faces. It wasn't just footage. It was a portrait of a moment that no press conference could reproduce. Then, she turned to the camera. Not Jamal's, one of the phones being held by a teenager at the front of the crowd. She looked straight into the lens. This is what people in this community deal with. Every day, being stopped, being doubted, being disrespected. Not because of what we've done, but because of how we look and where we live. Her words didn't tremble, they landed. And in that instant, the story left the block. News alerts pinged across phones nationwide. Breaking. Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez stopped by NYPD officers in Bronx. Viral video shows Congresswoman confronting racial profiling. AOC speaks out. This is not rare. This is routine. Social media lit up. The live stream hit over 50,000 viewers within the hour. Her face, not in a suit, not behind a mic, but in street clothes. Under afternoon light, flooded timelines back on the ground. Mills took a step forward, trying to salvage what couldn't be salvaged, Congresswoman. We didn't recognize you. That wasn't our intent. She looked at him with eyes that didn't blink. That is the intent, she said. When you see someone and assume they don't belong, that's exactly the problem. And with that, she turned away, not dramatically, not defiantly, just with certainty. The kind you only have when you know the moment isn't just yours anymore. It belongs to the people. Asterisk by the next morning, the footage had reached every major network, not through polished news segments, but through stitched-together Instagram lives, TikTok duets, and Twitter reposts. It was messy, raw, pixelated, and more powerful than any official broadcast. Clips of Alexandria standing in the Bronx, holding her congressional ID while confronting the officers, played across time zones. News anchors called it a teachable moment. Social media called it what it was: profiling, injustice, disrespect, and resilience. The NYPD press office held a briefing by noon. The spokesperson, rigid in posture and rehearsed in tone, read a prepared statement behind a wooden podium. We regret the situation that occurred yesterday involving Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. The officers involved did not recognize her and were responding to a report of suspicious filming. We are reviewing protocols and will cooperate fully with any inquiry. The room was tense. Reporters raised their hands before the last word left. The spokesperson's mouth: is this how the NYPD approaches all people filming in public? Would the same treatment have occurred in Tribeca? Did either officer apologize at the scene? But the press officer stuck to the script. No further comments at this time. Back in D.C., Alexandria was already in motion. She didn't wait for sympathy. She didn't hide behind her title. Instead, she sat in a quiet office, opened her laptop, and recorded a video, uncut, unscripted, and unmistakably real. It began simply. Hi, I'm Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You've probably seen the video. She didn't wear makeup. She didn't adjust her lighting. She didn't soften her voice. What happened to me yesterday was not extraordinary, and that's the problem. She recounted the step by step her decision not to identify herself, the silence, the assumptions, the moment she chose to reveal the truth. But this isn't about me, she said. It's about how often this happens to people without a title, without a camera, without a crowd. And then, she made it bigger. This is about accountability, not just of individual officers, but of systems, protocols that make suspicion the starting point for people who look like me, who look like us. She announced the beginning of a new initiative, the Street Justice Project, an independent review board composed of community leaders, legal advocates, and civil rights experts. Its goal: to collect first-hand accounts of stop-and-frisk abuse, catalog unlawful detentions, and pressure local governments to implement oversight mechanisms at the neighborhood level. She ended the video simply. I'm not going to let this moment fade into headlines. I'm going to follow it. Within hours, the video reached 4.6 million views. In the Bronx, people gathered at the corner of 233rd Street and White Plains Road, the exact site of the incident. Some brought signs. Others simply came to stand. It wasn't a protest. Not yet. It was remembrance. The same teen who streamed the event live painted a cardboard sign and taped it to the lamppost. They didn't know who she was. Now they'll never forget. Asterisk by the following week, the moment wasn't just viral, it was everywhere. Network roundtables debated it. Podcasts dissected it. College professors referenced it in lectures on systemic bias. And across New York City, murals of Alexandria had begun to appear. Not the campaign version, not with a fist in the air or wrapped in red-white-blue dot. These were simpler. Her in jeans, in a tee, standing in the Bronx, holding her badge and holding her ground. But with that visibility came the rest of it. The noise, the backlash. It started, as always, in the form of doubt disguised as debate. Cable pundits framed it as a media stunt. A conservative radio host said, she baited them. She wanted this. Hashtags like hashtag AOC set up and hashtag Bronx Theatrics began trending. Edited clips circulated showing only the moment she pulled her ID, as if the entire incident had started there. She didn't flinch. Instead, Alexandria booked herself on 60 Minutes. The set was minimal. A single chair, a host who had done her research, and a camera crew who didn't ask her to rehearse. The interviewer leaned forward. Why didn't you identify yourself immediately? Alexandria's answer was steady. Because I shouldn't have to be somebody in order to be treated like a person. She paused. If I had said I was a congresswoman right away, they would have backed off. But what about everyone else who can't say that? The clip aired in full, and this time, even some skeptics leaned in. In Washington, the moment fractured clean lines. Some colleagues praised her. Others privately warned her, "You're making enemies." She already knew, but she also knew that political risk was not the same as moral compromise. On Capitol Hill, she introduced a new resolution, the Community Rights and Policing Transparency Act. It called for federal data collection on nonviolent police stops, a public database for misconduct complaints, and mandatory bias training tied to funding incentives. It didn't promise revolution, it promised accountability. Still, opposition arrived swiftly. Conservative lawmakers labeled it anti-police. Police unions pushed back with statements. One anonymous source accused her of trying to weaken enforcement tools in high-crime areas. But Alexandria wasn't chasing applause. She was chasing patterns and exposing them. Back in the Bronx, the street corner had become a landmark. Tourists started appearing, not in flocks, but quietly. Locals put up a makeshift bulletin board on the same lamppost, filled with messages. "I was stopped here too. I remember 2016, when they searched my backpack for nothing. Thanks for not backing down." And then came the messages. No one saw the threats, the emails, the coded warnings. She received extra protection. Her office changed protocols, but she didn't post about it. Instead, she kept walking the same streets, this time with purpose. Asterisk. It started with whispers in the Capitol halls, not public statements, not formal press releases, but conversations behind closed doors. Men in suits who lowered their voices when her name came up. Colleagues who smiled for the cameras but rolled their eyes in committee. She's turning this into a circus. Grandstanding. Good TV, bad governance. But Alexandria was used to that. What followed, however, was different. It was coordinated. Police unions from across the country issued joint statements condemning her proposed legislation. They framed the Community Rights and Policing Transparency Act as an attack on law enforcement, a threat to officer safety. Talking points spread like wildfire through cable news and conservative radio. On one panel, a retired police chief claimed, "She's exploiting a misunderstanding for political gain." Those officers followed procedure. No one mentioned that. The procedure was the problem. Online, the rhetoric turned uglier. Pundits resurrected old smears. A viral meme showed her face photoshopped behind bars, with the caption, "When AOC meets the law for real." And in the dark corners of the internet, where the words weren't jokes but warnings, she was being tracked, monitored, threatened. Threatened. Her security detail was quietly increased. Her staff began scanning emails differently. Background checks were run twice. Still, she didn't retreat. Alexandria held press conferences, town halls, live Q&As on Instagram, where she answered every accusation with facts, and then reminded people, "This isn't about me. It's about every person who doesn't have a live stream when they're stopped." The Bronx stood by her. Local leaders, pastors, teachers, union workers, they spoke out, signed petitions, wrote op-eds. A group of high school students created a digital exhibit called Profiled, Voices from the Bronx, curating stories from classmates who'd faced similar stops. The impact was undeniable, but so was the pushback. Then came the invitation, or the challenge, depending on how one looked at it, a congressional hearing on the proposed bill. Alexandria was asked to testify, not as a witness. As the author of the legislation, the hearing was set for Thursday morning, on national television. The lineup, members of both parties, police association, representatives, and legal scholars. The pressure was immediate. All week, her office was flooded with calls, some encouraging, others brutal. Her team shielded her from the worst of them, but she knew. She could feel it. The cost of visibility was rising. On the night before the hearing, she sat alone in her apartment, reviewing her statement. She didn't rehearse it. She read it aloud once, not to memorize it, but to feel it. And then she folded the paper, placed it in her bag, and texted her mother, "I'm not afraid, just tired, but I know this matters." Asterisk, the room was quiet. Not the silence of respect. The silence of waiting, cold, procedural. Walls lined with portraits of men long gone. Cameras positioned at fixed angles. Nameplates shining under sterile light. The House Committee on Justice. Oversight was in session. At the center table sat Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, in a charcoal gray blazer, no notes in front of her, only her folded hands and a memory sharper than any script. To her right sat a police union representative. To her left, a civil rights attorney from Baltimore. Across from her, members of Congress, some leaning in, some leaning back. The chairwoman cleared her throat. "Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, you may begin." Alexandria nodded once, then began. Her voice was even, but full. "Thank you. I'm not here today because I was stopped by police officers in my district. I'm here because of how routine that stop was, not just for me, but for millions of Americans who live that reality without a title or an audience." A few heads lowered. Pence paused, mid-stroke. She continued. "What happened to me wasn't unusual. That's exactly the point. I wasn't targeted because I'm a congresswoman. I was mistaken for someone without power. And the way I was treated, the assumptions, the tone, The escalation, that's how you treat someone when you think they have no voice. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The hearing room was still. Even the cameras seemed quieter. I didn't identify myself right away because I wanted to feel what it's like to be seen as no one, because for most people in my district, that's every day. She reached into her bag and pulled out a printed screenshot from the live stream, her standing in the street, holding her ID. This is the moment it changed. But it shouldn't have taken this, she said, tapping the image. It shouldn't take a badge for someone to be treated with dignity. The chair of the police union cleared his throat. With all due respect, Congresswoman, our officers followed standard procedure. She cut him off. Not with aggression, but precision. Standard procedure is exactly what needs to change. The room held its breath. Then she outlined the bill again. Clearly, National Database of Stop and Search Encounters Independent Civilian Review Boards with real enforcement power, asterisk, local funding tied to transparency metrics, asterisk, mandatory DS, and bias training, refreshed annually. One congressman muttered something under his breath. She turned toward him. You don't have to agree with the bill, she said, but you can't deny the pattern. She paused. Then, with calm certainty, because the moment this went live, my inbox filled with stories, thousands, from New York, from Ohio, from Arkansas, Black teens, Muslim women, veterans, students, mothers, fathers, all saying, me too. I was stopped. I was questioned. I was treated like a threat. She turned back to the room. You don't have to have a title to have dignity, but you do need one to be heard here. That's why I'm using mine. For the first time, no one spoke back. And somewhere in the back row, a congressional aide, young, quiet, unnoticed, closed her laptop for a moment, just to listen. Asterisk, weeks had passed since the hearing. The news cycle had moved on mostly. Other headlines had taken the spotlight, but in the Bronx, the story hadn't faded. It lived on in conversations, in classrooms, in barbershops, in late-night corner store talks, not as drama, but as example. In Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. She was still walking those streets, not flanked by cameras, not followed by news crews, just walking like before. Except now, there was something different in how people looked at her. Not with awe, with recognition. One morning, she returned to the corner of 233rd and White Plains Road. The lamppost still bore the sign from that day. They didn't know who she was. Now they'll never forget. But below it, something new had been added. Bulletin board, weatherproofed with plastic and framed in plywood. On it, printed emails, handwritten notes, school essays, photos, stories, testimonies from people who'd watched the video and remembered their own moment of being unseen. She stood in front of it quietly, reading. A middle school girl approached her, shy, unsure. Hi, she said. I wrote one of those. Alexandria smiled. Which one? The girl pointed. A piece of lined paper, folded in half, now laminated. At the top, in blue ink, I was stopped in front of my building. I didn't cry, but later, I did. Alexandria didn't say anything. She just nodded, and they stood there together for a while, shoulder to shoulder. 2 generations of the same truth. Later that day, she met with local leaders inside a converted rec center, one that, through redirected federal funds, now hosted legal aid workshops, resume clinics, and know your rights sessions. That wasn't flashy, but it was functional, sustainable. She knew the bill wouldn't pass in its full form, not this year, maybe not the next, but parts of it were already being replicated in cities that had seen enough. In Minneapolis, new civilian oversight boards. In Atlanta, public databases of traffic stops. In LA, legislation introduced for officer training reform. The ripple was real, but she wasn't measuring success by votes. She was measuring it by presence, by how many more people now stepped forward without fear of being ignored. That evening, she recorded a short message, not for the news, but for the next community meeting. She sat in front of a plain wall, no lights, no makeup. What happened to me could have happened to you, and it probably already has. But what came after? That was all of us. We made it visible. We made it matter. She paused, smiled, soft but certain. Power isn't just in titles, it's in showing up and staying. Asterisk, she walked back into the Bronx as Alexandria, and she left as something else, not louder, not bigger, just more deeply rooted. Not just a name, a mirror, a reminder, a voice that stayed.